Thank you.
Thank you. It's all yours, Janet.
All right. Well, thank you and welcome everyone. This brings back memories of teaching college classes online on Zoom. So it's not as nice as being in person, but it does enable all of us to be together during this time. As Erin said, my company is Community Development Services of Montana, and I in the process of retiring from that part of my work, which is primarily to assist communities across the state in activities like urban renewal and downtown redevelopment and housing. And but I'm going to continue my work as an adjunct faculty member at Montana Tech, teaching technical writing. But I have been working with the GISers in Montana for over 20 years, helping them with their conferences and more recently serving on the Montana Land Information Advisory Committee. So I have a long-standing relationship with the group and really admire all of you who do this important work for our state in helping develop and maintain our spatial data infrastructure. So thank you all for all your good work. So welcome to the Land Information Grant Program Seminar. I encourage questions. You can either raise your hand or type in the chat box, and I'll try to pay attention. I think questions can make the seminar more interesting for everyone. And if you have a question, it's likely others have the same one. So please feel free. If we get too long in our discussions, we can cut it off and move on. And then there'll be some time at the end for additional questions and discussion. Erin and John Kilgore are here, and there may be some questions that they'll be able to answer better than I. And I encourage them to chime in when we're trying to give you the best answer possible. So again, this grant seminar is brought to you by Montana State Library and the Land Information Advisory Council. And just a quick overview of our presentation today. We're going to talk about the legal and administrative framework, in other words, the context within which we're all operating for the Montana Land Information Program. Every year, the Advisory Council and the staff prepare a land information plan. We'll talk a little bit about that because it does guide this process. We'll talk about the grant application itself, or excuse me, eligibility, and how you can be ready to put your best foot forward. We'll talk about what information, what evidence you're going to have to provide to meet the evaluation criteria for a successful proposal. And then we're going to spend some time just in a more general way. I know some of you have experience in grant writing, others of you have less. So this is kind of a primer in a way, but I think it'll be helpful to even the more experienced grant writers. Then because I'm a teacher of writing, we're going to spend a little time on some key issues that we want to address in our writing that make our grant proposals stronger. And then we'll have some time for some final notes and discussion. As I mentioned earlier, there's also some pieces that John and Erin are going to speak to specifically with respect to the more technical aspects of the application process. So again, we're going to begin with that legal and administrative framework for the MLIA program. And while Montana has had an active GIS program, particularly starting with some of the Superfund activity more than 30 years ago, it's only since really 2005 that we've had more of the administrative framework that has guided the activities of, or the state geospatial activities. So in 2005, the state of Montana adopted the Montana Land Information Act. It was a legislative action signed by the governor and is codified under this portion of the Act. I hear some noises in the background. Perhaps someone could mute their speakers. Okay. So what is really the purpose? What this Act has as its purpose? And that really is, and I've highlighted and read some of the key terms, which are really, in the heart of the Act's purpose. And that is, again, to collect, maintain, and disseminate. So there's the first really key part is to the actual collection of data that represents Montana's natural and artificial land characteristics. But it's not just the collection that's important. It's also the fact that it needs to be sustained over time, so that we don't just collect the data, but we actually make sure that those data sets are protected. And then takes us to the next part of it, is that it's not just a collection, again, it's maintenance, and that there is in a manner, the manner in which this data is collected remains consistent. Because while we each may work on a data collection or a data development project for our community, all of this data then links with other data to create statewide, regional, and ultimately national and potentially global information. So that consistent collection enables us to use this data across a much larger geographic area. And so that consistency then is important with respect to its maintenance, but also in terms of its accuracy. And then finally, this notion that it's not just data collection for its own sake, but that it's commonly available. In other words, and then it's available to all of us. We see that in much of our world today, from Google Maps to the cadastral system that maintains the property land use records, that members of the public have access to this data across a wide range for a wide range of purposes and across a wide area. So this Act really embodies those things that really enable that collection, maintenance, accuracy, and availability of our geospatial data. So the Act itself does a number of things. First of all, it creates the Montana Land and Information Advisory Council, which is appointed ultimately by the governor and is housed within the Montana State Library. That council approves an annual land information plan, and it oversees the grant program, but it also has a stewardship role for the Montana spatial data infrastructure, in that it makes sure that we are maintaining those layers. And again, that land plan itself that the council oversees talks about the priorities in any particular year or set of years of what types of data or what are the specific needs with respect to collection, maintenance, and dissemination. The Act also establishes a fund source, which is administered by the Montana State Library. And the monies for this fund come from the recordation costs at the county level. $1.50 of each fee collected for recordation, copying, and filing is made available for the programs of the Montana Land Information Advisory Council. And the Act establishes the Montana State Library as the administrator, including the duties, the administrative duties associated with the grant program. Are there any questions about the Act or the role of the council? So understanding this is the context. It's a state authorized program that's managed by the Montana State Library and the appointed members of the council. As I mentioned, each year a land information plan is prepared. The grant program that we're going to be talking about today draws its authority, so to speak, or it's certainly its direction from this land plan. So the land plan in every year sets priorities, sets 4 priorities. One for the council: what types of activities will the council be focusing on? Could be outreach, it could be more grant development, it could be identifying ways in which land information affects policy and encouraging people to take advantage of this technology. Is a variety of things. The MLIA Grant Program, about which we're going to talk today. The plan also talks about the development and maintenance of the Montana Spatial Data Infrastructure. I apologize, we've always teased, there's lots of acronyms in the GIS world, Geographic Information Systems. But those data layers are part of the responsibility of the council, and then overall GIS coordination. There are Aaron, I think this is still correct. We on this list, but there are 6. Let's see.
That's correct. There are 15.
15. Very good. Thank you. 15 layers, data layers that have been identified as part of this spatial data infrastructure, and 6 of them are stewarded outside of the Montana State Library by various agencies, steward being that person or agency that's responsible for the maintenance of that layer. And the other 9 are stewarded by the Montana State Library. So focusing now on the grant priorities themselves, this year we've broken those priorities into 2 tiers. And when I say priorities, these are the activities that are being encouraged by the grant applicants, something that would fit within these priorities. So there's 2 tiers. The first tiers are those that align, first tier priorities are those that align with the goals of the land information plan for fiscal year 2023. And we'll talk about those in just a moment. And the tier 2 priorities are assisting all the various eligible applicants, local, tribal, and state governments with implementing GIS programs and data collection that's focused on government planning. And what do we mean by that? Things like maybe housing plans or infrastructure, capital improvement planning, other business practices that are inherent in the operation of a tribal or local government or state agency. That would, again, something like the land property records or making sure that 911 addresses are correct. All of those kinds of things are important. And then asset management, that's assets that are tied to the land. So again, tier 1 specifically are tied to the goals of this year's land information plan. Tier 2 are sort of the normal processes that are assisted by and facilitated by good geographic information. So tier 1, are a series of priorities that create or update data sets and develop workflows for the purpose of continued participation in the Montana spatial data infrastructure. So again, this is that, the many pieces that contribute to the whole, that data that's collected in a consistent and accurate manner, that again, that data contributing to those layers we talked about, and any other statewide data collection initiatives as listed on the following 3 slides. So we're updating data sets. That's the overall tier 1. And then the first under tier 1, any grant projects, proposals that support next generation 911 GIS information, rather, that supports 911 efforts that are part of and contribute to or are compliant with the National Emergency Number Association, or NENA standards. So that's and if anyone has any specific technical questions, I would direct those to Aaron, but that's those types of projects which are in support of the next generation 911. And subsets of those include boundary identifications, public safety answering point, emergency services boundaries for various first responder services, and or provisioning boundaries. And Aaron, could you tell us what provisioning boundaries are?
I'm going to pass that along to Matt or Bob. I don't think Michael's on the line right now.
Okay.
That specific one, I would assume it just has to do with any boundaries related to next gen, but that specific one I'm not that aware of.
Yeah, I can speak briefly to the provisioning boundaries. There's a little bit difference. There's a PSAP boundary and then there's a provisioning boundary. And my understanding is the PSAP boundary is where that dispatch center would respond to, whereas the provisioning boundary is more who's in charge of keeping track of those addresses. So generally that provisioning boundary is the county boundary. They're actually in control of those addresses versus for whatever reason, a different dispatch center might swoop into a corner of your county and address some of those calls for the PSAP boundary.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Thank you. So we're talking both about administrative boundaries, who's providing the services, and then also the where of it, where those services are provided. So very good. Thank you. The second subset of Group A are addresses, development of the data, and here's another acronym, NENA again. Oh, that's that National Emergency Number Association standard compliant that again can be integrated into that spatial layer structures and addresses theme. So again, this is address data that contributes to the entire data infrastructure. So the first one is about provision of services and administration. The second one is about data collection for the data layer. And then the third piece under this grant priority is the development of information surrounding roads, center lines, again, that are standard, that are compliant with the national standard and are able to integrate into the Montana Spatial Data Infrastructure theme, transportation theme. So again, it's a combination of data applications and then contributing both to the infrastructure. Any other questions, or anyone want to chime in on this first tier or tier 1A? The second set of priorities under tier 1 is the Montana Spatial Data Infrastructure improvement to the cadastral and administrative boundary themes. Cadastral, of course, has to do with the property land records, as we, ownership and shapes of those pieces. And also the administrative boundaries, the cities, counties, and other boundaries that are important to the management of local and local governments. Specifically within those two, with respect to cadastral improvements to digital representation of the public land survey system, PLSS, for the purpose of improving accuracy of the cadastral and administrative boundaries themes, collecting new survey control data. And Aaron's going to speak to this in a little bit about control data and PLSS in addition to what is presented here. And then the digitation and dissemination of documents related to PLSS survey corners. So this is really has to do with property, land, property where it exists, you know, the by owner, by administrative boundary. And again, those administrative boundaries, I don't know, Aaron, if they go as small as like special districts, taxing districts, as well as, do those include like SIDs, special improvement districts as well? Or are they just cities and counties?
The Montana Spatial Data Infrastructure, I'll drop it in the chat, but there are a set of, I guess we could call them sub-themes for the administrative boundaries framework. And those include, let me pull that up now. We have state, county, incorporated cities and towns, tribal boundaries, school districts, voting precincts, weed districts, tax increment financing districts. And then we also manage the park boundaries, managed areas, which have to do with federal managed areas, and conservation districts and rural fire districts. Those are the themes that comprise currently could comprise the administrative boundaries framework.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I wanted to, so we have to think, even there are some as you said, sub themes within the city and county boundaries. And then the third piece of the Tier 1 grant priorities is integrating GIS into the planning and preparation of geo-enabled elections. So in this particular case, we're talking about collaborations with local government to implement a single address point data set that supports the election process. And then to also create and maintain essential election boundary data sets. And that goes to, I think, some of what Aaron was talking about, precincts that meet the administrative boundary standards of the Montana Spatial Data Infrastructure. So again, we have, you know, the focuses here, foci here are to improve these types of data sets, emergencies, the cadastrals, administrative boundaries, and elections. These are the focuses that have been identified by the Montana Land Plan as being among the Tier 1 priorities for grant applications for the fiscal 22-23 year. The Tier 2, again, are a different set of priorities. These are to develop geographic information systems that, again, support those ongoing workflows that we discussed. You know, any kinds of, you know, whether it's infrastructure management, asset management, other types of activities that local governments, tribal governments engage in, and agencies to build their local GIS capacity. So the first of this is just any kind of project that would be coordinated with the partners on the stewards and others working with the Montana Spatial Data Infrastructure to clearly identify their needs and help them develop a realistic scope of work, budget, and schedule to achieve a project. So these are planning grants. So this is where you might, if you're thinking about applying for a larger grant and you want to, you know, develop a project, you would work with people who are all familiar with that data layer that you're interested in, and to help you to develop a realistic scope. We'll talk about this again this morning, but one of the important things about developing projects is that we develop projects that we can actually get done. More is not necessarily always better. In other words, we want to take on projects that we can feasibly accomplish. And these priority two, or excuse me, tier two type of grant is available. They're going to be up to $1,000 to help a grant recipient plan a project, correspond with a MSDI partner to develop a realistic scope and budget that then would enable you to be much more competitive and ultimately much more successful in applying for a grant and implementing a project. 4% of the funds available in any year, in this year, will be available for GIS planning projects. And again, it will promote partnerships and in the spatial data community, but perhaps more importantly, it'll help you define projects that are doable and have a greater chance of being successful. The second priority under these tier two sets of project priorities for the land plan. So these are geographic data layers that are standardized and regularly maintained to support information needs and support activities, including but not limited to, as we said earlier, these are the land use planning, infrastructure, and asset management. So it's the way local governments use GIS data to manage all of their various public services, whether it's, location of streets or various government buildings, and other infrastructure associated with the management of a local government area, jurisdiction. This should have been C, excuse me, but this is to support, the third one is to support geographic information systems. Again, this is the other elements of that can also be included, things like emergency management, community resilience planning, supporting information for the planning, mitigation, and recovering of hazards. So we were in the previous slide, we talked about the physical assets using GIS to facilitate information gathering and assessment of physical infrastructure. This one is focused on primarily on dealing with forces, hazardous forces, that these can be tied, for example, to local hazard mitigation plans that communities are engaged in preparing, dealing with disasters, potential disasters, and resilience in the face of catastrophic changes or even ongoing changes in our communities. And now I'd like Erin to talk just a little bit more about priorities related to the public land survey system and survey control.
Sure. Do you have another slide? Is this it?
This is it.
Okay. The reason why we wanted to just briefly touch on this is because the application itself is a little different if you are planning to submit a grant for the purposes of collecting new survey control to improve the digital representation of the PLSS, the Public Land Survey System, also known as our CAD NSDI. So there you go for acronyms, Janet. If you plan on collecting survey control, filling out a grant to collect survey control, so what that would do is it would improve the digital representation of the CAD NSDI, in turn improving also the representation of administrative boundaries and tax parcels and other GIS data layers that are tied to the CAD and SDI. So any kind of data that you might have that is defined by section, township, and range, you would see improvements. So there are going to be certain pieces of the grant process, because we're trying to create a more streamlined process for this very specific priority and grant. There'll be pieces that you do not have to fill out. There are exceptions, and those are defined in the grant materials. And I do believe we're going to hit on each one of those later. And then also, we've been working hard to try to prioritize the areas in the state of Montana based on the need that we see and our analysts see, and then what's being reported to us by our local or regional GIS partners. And so there is a web map in the application materials that will define those priority areas. We can pull that up later. And if there is a section of the grant that if you're going to apply for a grant outside of those priority areas, you're going to have to write a statement as to why you want to improve that area over a priority or over a prioritized area. So the PLSS grants are just a little different because we're trying to streamline the process. And if you have questions, I encourage you to reach out to me, and I could put you in contact with either Jeff Hedstrom, who is on the call now, or Michael Fashaway. Michael is in charge of land information team here at the library, and Jeff is the cadastral theme lead. So I think that's about it, Janet. I'll turn it back over to you.
Aaron.
I guess we
Thanks,
can take questions.
Yeah, are there any questions of anything we've covered so far?
I have a question, but I don't know if it's the right time in the proposal in this meeting to ask it. So you guys can kind of tell me to wait or go ahead or not. But so my question is, I just realized I was actually filling out the grant package yesterday, and I realized that we can now apply, for a grant for the NINA 911, trying to get that set up and whatnot. So my question is, Aaron, I've spoken to you extensively about our PLSS issue, and we've already discussed that about me applying, trying to make this a yearly thing, trying to get it straight. So my question is it possible to apply for two different instances where one you're applying to solve the PLSS problem, and then either apply again or in the same grant apply for funds to help with the NINA 911 portion as well? So I'm trying to figure out, is that allowed, or is it like a one-time, you can only use it for one project at a time?
I'll come off mute now. Good question. So you're wanting to apply for both a cadastral and a next gen priority?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I mean,
Aaron,
yeah.
I'm sorry, all I was seeing was audio who was speaking. Could I get a name for that?
I apologize. I should have put my name in front of it. My audio has to come from my phone. This is Brendan Wiltshire speaking.
All right,
He's from
thank you.
And I'll change that.
Yeah, Stillwater County. So yeah, I you know what, we really discourage two priorities because we just see it's very difficult to do both in 1 year and get it done in 1 year and meet the year-long specific time frame. But I think we can talk more. What ends up happening is you'll end up, we see multiple years of grants, whether it's an extension, because it usually ends up being just a little too much to do in one grant year. And so what I would suggest is I would prioritize what you want to get done and make that a priority, and then fill out another grant next year. Or we have seen two different county entities be awarded grants within the same year. As long as I think you can prove that that you're able to manage all that in 1 year, I think that's really important.
That makes a lot of sense. I appreciate it. That does answer my question.
Yeah. Yep. Thanks, Brendan.
Aaron, can I say something too?
Yes, please.
Hi, Brendan. It might be worth talking to Bob and I about what you were thinking on the 911 side of things, because depending on what you were hoping to get done, there might be some things we can help you with outside of the grant aspect.
I'm sure that'd be great. I can definitely link up with you after and tell you kind of what I was thinking.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks.
Good. Thanks, Michael. Is there anyone else that's a question before we proceed? So this year, our projected funds available are 250,000. And again, that will cover both the planning grants and the primary tier level grants. $1,000 is a maximum of any one planning grant. That's the state, the MLIA portion. Certainly it can be matched with other funds. The project grants can be of any amount less than 250,000. So theoretically, you would have just one grant that would be given. Usually we have anywhere from about a dozen to or more grants a year. The average grant is somewhere between 25 and about $15,000 to $25,000. But again, it's feasible that a grant application will come in for the entire amount, but that's pretty rare. And then again, the funds are dependent upon the number of recordations in the county clerk's offices, and that can vary from year to year, but the projected amount is 250,000. So one of the things that is important to remember in grant writing is that there's a number of things that we can do on a regular basis to be eligible and ready to apply for a grant. And a lot of the work that we do in developing a grant proposal happens before we sit down to actually fill out an application. But talking about eligible applicants and readiness first, what kinds of things can you do to prepare to write a grant proposal, but also just in terms of being ready to implement a project? It's really important to think about readiness. So first of all, who under the Montana Land Information Act and under the grant program, who can actually apply for these funds? Any division of state government can apply. So, agencies and are eligible. I think universities are too. Is that correct, Erin?
That is correct.
Yes. So any division of state government can be an applicant. Any city, county, or other division of local government can apply. A tribal government within the state can apply. Oh yeah, there it is. There's the University of Montana system. So what we really are looking at here is any entity within the state of Montana that's a division of government or the university system. And one of the things that I would emphasize with respect to this program or any grant program, partnerships are always a stronger way to approach a project. So if there's an opportunity for a local government to work with a local campus in the Montana University system, or a county to work with a tribal government, it really is depending on, of course, the nature of the grant. If it's a particularly, like an infrastructure asset management grant, that would make more sense just for the entity to apply. But in cases where there's some opportunities, for example, in first responder services for cities and counties to work together, that might make for a stronger proposal, but also for a more successful project. And now focusing on readiness. What do we mean by readiness? it's rather than saying, oh, there's money available, what can we do? It's much better to approach this as, what are the things that we are trying to achieve? Whether we're, from local or tribal governments or state agency, what are we trying to achieve in our community? What are the needs? Understanding in the context of your operations as an entity, what do you need? Whether that's identified through a needs analysis or experiences that you have on a day-to-day basis, recognizing where you fall short. Being able to document those needs is really important because it makes your case to the grant reviewers. So it's important to be able to identify the need you're trying to address. And then secondly, connecting that project, the project outcomes to those needs. It's not a solution in search of a problem. It's really a problem in search of a solution. And what does that solution look like? So you want to make sure, again, you have an identified, documented need, and then connecting that need to the project that you want to develop. Under the third thing, and we're really talking about purpose here. The third element of developing purpose is to tie your priorities for your programs to those of the Montana Land Plan. So how does a particular project not only serve your need, but how is it connected to one of the priorities in the plan? And then specifically, how does the nature of your scope, and this goes to what Aaron was saying earlier about what you can really accomplish. How does that scope enable you to do it? So you can have a grand project, but if its scope is too broad to really address the problem or too narrow, it's not going to be as successful. So the methodologies that you employ to achieve your goals, to achieve your objectives, should be, enabling. So if part of your issue, for example, pardon me, is that you don't have accurate addresses, for example, how does the scope of work, what elements of the scope of work will help remedy that? Not just collecting the information, but understanding the challenges and obstacles that could occur in trying to achieve those objectives. So the scope has to not only talk about the outcomes, but the methods that address the inherent challenges that you would face. And then we talked a moment ago about partnerships and collaborations. And so you need to think about, who are your stakeholders? I'm so sorry. Can we turn off recording for just a moment? I need to clarifications. Who are your stakeholders? What does that mean? It's a combination of a number of different stakeholders. First of all, the community you serve, the people who live in your communities that are going to benefit from better emergency services, better land records, better hazard mitigations. And also it's the spatial data infrastructure stewards, managers, people who are interested in the data that you collect, that data then contributes to the benefit of the whole. Your stakeholders are also the granting entity, the Montana Land Information Advisory Council and the Montana State Library, who have an interest in your project's success. So understanding those the people that are going to benefit. And then if you have partners, if you have the opportunity to work with other jurisdictional entities and agencies, then that not just serves the people in your own jurisdiction, but then your beneficiaries become a much wider audience. So again, those opportunities to share information, to collaborate with other partners, again, identifying those opportunities to work together enhances your readiness. So the other thing is that very often, and this is kind of a theme that we'll go back to a couple of times this morning, but one of the things that often happens with projects like this is that every local governments, particularly smaller local governments, are very, very busy, that one person may have to take on a number of different duties. And so it's easy to turn the work of maintaining your spatial data infrastructure at the local level and the state level, to turn it to others, to consultants, to specialists outside of the realm of your local government or agency or tribe. And the problem with this is that then the applicant, the actual local government, the local or the agency, doesn't take as much ownership of the project or its products or its outcomes, because it's easy to turn it over to someone else. So what's really important as part of the readiness exercise is that the local government itself, the applicant itself, become familiar with the importance of the project, to understand the project, what are the commitments associated with it, what are the long-term obligations associated with receiving this money, and what are going to be the benefits. So again, I know there's, I'm a consultant, I know there's many other consultants joining us on the call today, but it's really incumbent upon us as technical support folks and to help local governments understand the projects, to take ownership of those projects. And that is really clearly important in terms of the long-term benefits of maintaining and enhancing our spatial data infrastructure. And I think this is an important point, and I'd really welcome any questions at this point to make sure that I'm being clear on this, that it's not, while the benefit of a consultant is tremendous, particularly if you don't have that expertise on staff, but it's also the responsibility of the applicant to understand the benefits and the responsibilities associated with the project. Would you want to add anything to that, Erin?
I think I think you've done a good job explaining it. I think it's in some instances they're called a project sponsor. It's not necessarily someone who will be in the middle of the project, or it's not someone who is going to be managing the project. It's your executives in your organization that understand it, that support it, and will help you if issues come along the way. And then they can also relay all the good things that you are doing. It's good to have someone like that as a part of your team.
Thank you. So it's also important as part of your readiness exercise to identify someone, as Erin just said, it could be a local official, it could be your land use planner, you're a county executive, you're a community development director. Someone needs to also serve as the project manager, someone who is responsible for reporting, for making sure the project is moving along, and that's not the consultant. The consultant can help the project manager prepare reports and that sort of thing, but there has to be someone identified from the applicant who is responsible for the administration of the grant and the project. But you also have to be clear on where you do need consulting help. If you are going to be hiring a consultant, what is the role? What kind of support is that consultant going to provide? What is the work the consultant's going to do? So this applicant clarity piece is really understanding the project, who's going to be responsible for managing the project, and what, if any, is the role of a consultant. So we all recognize that we need, at various points, we might need that professional assistance. And it's so important to have that technical support from a consultant, but the applicant needs to be in charge and understand the project. The second part of clarity in this readiness aspect is knowing who's going to be responsible for the fiscal management of your grant. And that might mean you don't wait until you've got the grant to walk over to your budget director or your county treasurer to say, oh, by the way, we just got this grant. Make sure that the persons who are responsible for managing county budgets or city budgets are aware of the grant and its sources and any other matching funds that you might be using. You should also visit with your county or city financial folks or your agency folks to make sure that you are following local procurement rules. If you're hiring a consultant before you get the grant, have you gone through the proper procedures? Various counties have different rules about what triggers a competitive bidding process, when can you justify sole source, if you have to buy any equipment, how many bids do you need to get, what's the bid opening process, what's the advertising, what are the advertising requirements. So again, make sure you have a relationship with your fiscal people and you've identified all of the issues that likely will come up. Another one is timing. These grants, may be awarded outside of your normal calendar for budgeting. Most cities and counties have provisions for late additions to the budget, but make sure that you know what those are so that then once you receive these funds, if you receive these funds, they can be authorized for use. More on readiness. Is this project being undertaken by a partnership? And that means, again, if it's a university and a city government or a tribal and a county government, whatever those, or a state agency and a university, whatever those partnerships might be, you need to visit with them. Are they partners that are going to be providing money? Are they going to be providing in-kind staff support? Are they going to be advisory in their role? What is that relationship? But remember, your project consultant is not your partner. And then what kinds of evidence or what kind of documentation do you have for those partnerships? Particularly if that partner is going to be providing financial or in-kind, in other words, services that have a fiscal financial value, is do you have an agreement? Do you have memorandums of understanding or letters of support? And those letters of support or fiscal support are part of the application. So again, you want to, these are all things you can be doing in advance. So I would even recommend that, I know we're right in the middle of a current grant cycle, that if you're starting to think about next year, that these are some of the things you also begin to amass and collect and consider. As the question that came about 2 projects. There's a perfect example of the second project, the one you choose not to do this year. You begin that readiness effort so that by the time January 2023 comes around, you have a lot of this work already done. In a partnership project, you also may need to identify who's the lead, who is going to be the applicant, and what are each partner's responsibilities with respect to grants management and project management. Project partners can improve efficiency. And one of the things I want to say is that not always, but in many cases, partnerships really do provide stronger projects. They can improve project efficiency. In other words, you can share the load. They of course can contribute matching dollars and help make through in-kind contributions and other matching dollar funds can make those MLIA funds go further. It's greater leveraging opportunities is another way to say it. So that, if you're matching that grant from the state with some local dollars from your local Department of Fish, Wildlife and Parks, or the local university, that those dollars that come from the MLIA fund are multiplied. Another advantage of partnerships is that you bring so much more expertise and infrastructure, whether it's the administrative functions, office space, equipment, to the project. And then, as I said earlier, partnership projects also enable a project to benefit a larger geographical area. And they bring, partnership projects bring more stakeholders, supporters to the table. More involvement, more recognition of benefit to those stakeholders. And again, that not only assures project success, but over the long run, more partners that have a stake in the project can help sustain that. The more of the projects, the better chances for sustainability, because the benefit is recognized by so many more. And those types of projects that have those built-in partnerships, or that encompass a wider range of expertise, while there's no scoring necessarily associated with partnership projects, they may come across in the other types of criteria in terms of project management capabilities and sustainability. They may end up getting ranked higher under the various criteria associated with grant evaluation. So I thought it's been an hour in. Would anyone, we could take 5 minutes now and take a walk around the room and come back. It's 10 o'clock, if we wanted to just reconvene in about 5 minutes, let's just take a little break. So welcome back, everyone. The next section of our presentation today is going to be the evaluation criteria. And this section of the PowerPoint is going to talk about essentially how each part of your application will be graded. So it's not just the evaluation criteria, it's also what we're going to be looking for. I would say more, requirements and criteria might have been a better title for this. I have 6 criteria, but we're going to, I'm not sure that number was right. I adapted this presentation from the one I gave in a couple of years ago, so there might be, I might not have fixed that. But anyway, we're going to focus on these criteria and how they're weighted in the application. So the first item is relevance. And I want to note from the beginning is what Aaron referred to. This section is not required for those applicants who are applying for funding for collecting news survey control data. So if you are doing that, you would skip that. If you are requesting funding for that, you would skip this piece. But for all others, what you want to demonstrate in this section, which is worth 15% of your grade, so to speak, of your evaluation, is that you actually meet those purposes that we talked about earlier of the Montana Land Information Act, and that in the land information plan, you can tie your project to a grant category priority. So that what you want to say is this project is in response to one of those tier 1 or tier 2 priorities, and then within each one, which one, and how your project will help further that objective that's identified in that grant category. So again, as Aaron mentioned earlier, you want to focus your efforts on one priority. Again, more is not necessarily better, trying to address more than one priority is, first of all, there's a feasibility issue. Can you really accomplish that in the time and do it with the funds available? But more importantly, we end up in many cases not getting those things done because we lack the focus that we needed to get a single effort to address a particular priority completed. So it's important that, again, as part of that readiness that we talked about in the previous slides, it's important, part of that readiness is to really focus on what you can accomplish in that grant period of 1 year. So that's really, so it's both to be successful and not have to, for example, request more time or end up not meeting your project deadlines, versus maybe not getting as much done as you'd like, but getting done what you'd like successfully and with the focus required to be successful. Any questions on this? We're going to talk a little more about relevance on the next slide.
I've got a question really quick.
Yes, good.
In the relevance area, is this something we address with a narrative, or would there be kind of a fillable spot?
Yeah,
There's going to be, or go ahead, Erin, please.
yeah, it is a narrative, and there'll be a fillable spot in the Amplifund application. And I do believe, and I think it's 3,000. So the application, we had to define characters instead of words. I believe it's 3,000 characters, which is almost the equivalent of like 3/4 of a page,
Okay.
or single spaced. I don't have that pulled up in front of me.
I
But
do. I have it right here. It is.
Okay.
It's 3,000 words. 3,000 characters.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Which is
Yeah,
the
this-
equivalent of about 250 to 300 words.
Okay, thank you.
I think I have those. I wrote down most of those here.
And John confirmed it in the chat. So
Yeah.
thank you,
okay,
Janet and
good.
John.
Okay. So some additional thoughts on relevance. As I said, focus on that one priority to assure manageability. And I think that's really, really key. You're not necessarily going to be awarded more points, and probably won't be if you try to do too much. And then again, linking those projects to the land plan and the land information plan, excuse me, the Land Act and the information plan. And then remember, sustainability is linked to relevance. So it's not just getting a whole bunch done, but it's being able to sustain it over time. So again, those discrete projects that you can handle are much more likely to be sustainable as well. And that's sustainability is a really key part of the Land Information Act. So, and the other element I don't have on the slide, but something to remember is that when we take on just the right amount, we are much more likely to be accurate. When we take on too much, accuracy can be sacrificed. So again, sustainability and accuracy, consistent collection are all enhanced if the project is manageable by the applicant, by the grantee. Oh, I have a hand from Brendan.
Yes, ma'am. So I was just gonna ask, so Stillwater County, we won a grant award for the PLSS points. And so I was wondering, when we fill this back out for the second time, because it's I'm gonna kind of try and transition it to a multi-year project, because it's probably gonna take that long to fix all the issues. Are we allowed to reuse some of the stuff from the previous grant, or do we need to reinvent the wheel every single time? I don't want it to be a surprise to you guys. I'm just trying to figure out the best route to handle that situation.
So I'll start and then let Erin and others add to this, Brendan. My response is, it's fine to reuse the stuff, but read it carefully to make sure that it's still relevant, you might have to change, you might have to note what's been accomplished versus what remains.
Right.
Some of the argument might still be valid. But as long as you know, if you're not just plopping things in there that, you know, are without revising them to reflect current conditions, I think that would be the concern I would have. But I think
That's exactly
Aaron
what
would
I was
probably
thinking.
be- Yeah, Aaron, would you want to add to that?
I agree with what you have said, Janet, and I would just advise that you do take into account any funding that you had received in that, whether you're on phase 2 or phase 3 of a multi-phase project, so that, you know, let's say you are right now you're going to collect do survey control in Stillwater County. Let's say you've already completed Columbus for the next round, and you want to, you know, I would just make sure you acknowledge that you are in the middle of it, and that what you have gotten to date, and I would say that for every section. And I think Janet had really good advice to reread it, make sure it still aligns with the current project. But yes, we don't have any problem with reusing pieces.
I will do that, definitely. I just wanted to make sure that was, you know, an okay, as long as obviously what you said, making sure I'm noting what we've done and what we're trying to accomplish in year 23. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think we see that in the executive summary a lot. And it's like this, so some folks forget to update that. And I think that piece is probably pretty important, is just, you know, to note where you are in the phases of your project.
So
That's a
And
good
just-
point. I'll definitely go in and update that.
And speaking about, you know, phasing, I'll mention this again in some of the mechanics of grant writing, but again, showing feasibility of the project being able to be accomplished, that whole notion of focusing on one priority. But project phases help us do that too, understanding that, you know, this is going to take multiple years. And while we can't guarantee funding every year, an approach that takes into account a longer time frame with, again, feasible bites, feasible pieces is often a more successful project as well. Oops, wrong way. So the second criteria we're going to talk about is public benefit, and that's worth 15% of your score on your proposal. And this section is not required for folks seeking project planning grants, those $1,000 just you know, planning grants, nor is it required for the survey, collecting new survey control data. So again, we're trying to streamline this process. So there are certain types of projects that won't require this section. So public benefit is defined in a number of ways. One is how this particular project will benefit one of the those layers, one of those Montana Spatial Data Infrastructure themes, and in particular, or including any of those that are identified in the Land Information Plan. The Land Information Plan, if you haven't read it, it's not very long. It's very succinct. It's organized in a way with headings that you can immediately reference the material you're looking for. You can draw ideas and phrases from the plan to support your benefits section. So you can say, you know, specifically, this project furthers the goals of the land use plan, and you can reference sections of that plan. So tying those two things together is one way to show public benefit. And then also the benefit to your entity. You know, how is it going to help your workflows, your jurisdictions, initiatives, specifically to your local government, you know, make your emergency service first responders more efficient, helping you further your management of your capital assets, how it's going to help address potential hazards, those things, what are the actual benefits? This ties, of course, to your, to your project, purpose, but it also specifically talks about that benefit of what are the outcomes and the results. And finally, the benefit to the citizens of Montana. Remember, whenever you're producing data or you're collecting and mapping information, you are in fact being contributing to a whole. You're a part of a whole. And how does your project then benefit the rest of our state? And then some additional notes on public benefit. You want to, first of all, focus on both long and short-term benefits. And how is it going to help your community in the short run? And then over time, where do you see the benefits? It could be in terms of saving your money and saving lives, in developing a capital improvement plan, for example, over time, that will address both immediate and long-term capital needs for your community or your agency. And then you want to emphasize the benefit to various populations. In other words, the diversity of the benefit. And that can be measured in terms of geographic, versus local versus regional versus statewide. It can also be in diversity of special groups. For example, housing plans that are aimed at benefiting low and moderate income residents of our community, or tax increment financing urban renewal projects that help communities restore historic central business districts. Those kinds of special benefits, regional, geographic, special groups, special needs populations. And then you also want to link this to bigger goals. This is sort of my bailiwick, but what we really want to do with any grant project that's being, any grant proposal should link the project, not just to the state land information plan or the act, but also the goals and objectives of your own community. And where are those articulated? They're articulated in your growth policies, in capital improvement plans, in hazard mitigation plans. For state agencies, they're associated with your mission statements, with your priorities as an agency. With universities, it might be areas of focus that your college is trying to enhance. Perhaps it's mapping of natural resources associated with its various natural resources programs. But you want to link the project essentially to the greater vision for your entity. So it's almost a dual effort. This kind of comes back to readiness as well. As you're developing your projects, you need to link them to your own community's vision documents. And again, sometimes they're, as I said, growth policies, sometimes they're housing plans, neighborhood plans, urban redevelopment plans, industrial development plans, capital plans, anything where the community has engaged in a public effort to identify the objectives and goals for that city or county. And then again, if it's a university or state agency, what process have you gone through to identify your priorities?
Janet, I think we have a hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry, I got carried away.
No, that's okay. Brendan,
Go
did you
ahead.
have a question? He might just have it still up. All right, we can.
I apologize. I think what happened is I turned it on my computer versus my phone. Just ignore me.
Okay,
I'll-
no worries.
I'll
We
fix
won't
it.
ignore you.
I can
Anybody
lower
else?
it.
Anybody else have?
Oh,
a
please,
question
because I
about
can't
this?
see it anymore.
Okay, I did it. In addition to what you said, if you have a strategic plan that's been put in place, or a disaster mitigation plan, those are some other documents that I thought of, that an IT strategic plan that you could align your public benefit with.
I've got something to add real quick, if it's okay.
Sure.
I just finished updating our county hazard mitigation plan for Teton County, and it was quite a process. And we just got it approved by FEMA, and it was just for Teton County. And then we found out that the state DES is starting to do regional mitigation plans. And then the state of Montana also does a hazard mitigation plan. So to kind of think about hazard mitigation plans in several layers, I think this GIS information is important, not just locally, but at both regional and state levels as well, to consider that.
So, yeah, thanks, Danny. That's really important. And I just to echo what you're saying, the more you can integrate those planning efforts, on multiple levels with your data, your land information, the stronger the public benefit is, and the more you can demonstrate that it has local, regional, and national implications. Thank you. Anybody else have anything to add here? This is, again, coming back to readiness. I would also strongly recommend that when, if you're a GIS professional for your city or county, that part of your readiness, part of your application development process should include if you have a city or county planner, that's, as Danny mentioned, who prepares the plans we just talked about. Get that planner involved in the application process. So the next section that we're going to talk about is worth 10%, is the project management and organizational capacity. Again, if you've gone through the readiness aspect of this, if you've addressed some of these things, these answers should already be in your notebook, so to speak. So what you're looking for what your reviewers will be looking for is that you have demonstrated either past record or willingness to learn, but certainly a past record of performance will be very important so other grant projects you worked on, experience with project management, even if those projects weren't grant funded, is important. The ability to implement the methodology described in the scope of work. So again, this goes back to feasibility, taking things on that you can accomplish. This might go to say that you are devoting, even if you have a consultant, that your project manager will spend X a number of hours per week or per month on this project. So showing that you have allocated and recognize the need for and allocated the necessary resources to the project. So again, you want to show your experience. You want to show the resources that are being committed to project management, and that can also include, in addition, you want to make sure you have applicant management skills. And then you can also talk about the roles of the consultants, other key personnel, and partners that might be helping to manage. So some additional notes on organizational capacity. Make sure you've identified all of your key personnel, your project manager, again, not the consultant. If you've already hired a consultant or have a consultant on retainer, who is that and what's that person's expertise? And then we talked about in readiness, the financial manager. Could be the tribal or local government budget director, an agency budget directors, or someone in those offices that is aware of and will be helping you manage the grant. Other ways you might be able to identify capacity. Certainly if you have had other MLIA grants, but any other grant funded projects, and as I said, project management and partnership experience. So if this is your first MLIA grant, look to other kinds of management expertise to draw upon in support of organizational capacity. And then your commitment to management, not just that you have the capacity, but that you're committed 2, being up to date on your timelines, reporting timelines in a way that understands what are your benchmarks, when do you hope to accomplish things, and then submitting reports, your commitment to submitting your reports to the state on time. There are periodic, there's going to be a second seminar later this year for the successful grant recipients to talk more about management. But in this particular, at this time in your application, your commitment to submit reports on time, to have good timelines that can help you keep track of your tasks and your outcomes. Also notes that, again, gotten in your pre-planning stage with your fiscal agents, what are the methods of procurement? What does your entity require in order to hire a consultant or to purchase equipment? And then what are your invoicing procedures? And in this case, how are you going to bill the government? What is a sample of the invoice you're going to send to the Montana State Library to be to receive your grant payments? And again, we're going to talk more about that in a separate management seminar, but just getting a copy of your standard invoice, how your entity will bill the state, is part of this application. So again, it's just, this is the red tape, paperwork, bureaucratic piece, but it's your commitment to say, yes, we will operate in a timely manner, and we have experience in doing so. Any questions on what we've covered so far? The next section, which is worth 10%, is sustainability. And this is always a key part of for those of you who have written grants over, not just to MLIA, but to other entities, know this is a key question. What do we do when the grant is over? How do we maintain these projects? So you want to be able to demonstrate that you have some type of long-term funding for maintenance and future enhancements. And that also includes things like staffing, making sure you have dedicated or at least a part of some staff time to maintain and update that information. Again, how if you have any partners in this project, how will those partners be involved over time? Okay, I don't have anything else on sustainability. Just, are there any questions on that?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
So sustainability would definitely be, it would be something that we would need to fill out if we're doing the PLSS as well. The points.
Yes.
Okay. Just making sure.
So yeah, there are no exceptions. Well, the planning grant is a shorter application, I believe. I'm not sure you have to have a plan of this question for the planning grant. Do you, Erin?
I do believe there are no exceptions
Oh, no exceptions. Okay.
for project sustainability.
So for a planning grant, I would think then that what you would need to do in this section is to talk about that part of your planning effort will be to identify staff and resources that will be used going over time, but you're considering a number of options. So you don't want to have too much pre-planning for a planning grant, but you should give some thought then in this section to making sure that you are aware of the need for a sustainability component. So the next thing we're going to talk about, this is not scored but considered. It's kind of like a partnership, the partnership criteria. It's not really scored but considered at some level. And this is what's called grant accountability. And this is where you have an opportunity to report on any existing grants or former grants that you've received through MLIA, and provide an update on efforts to sustain other GIS projects and programs. So even if you don't necessarily have had an MLIA grant before, you can talk about your approach to maintaining your projects and programs, and you can use other examples, but something to demonstrate that you are or will be accountable. And if in fact, sorry, if in fact you have had difficulties in completing projects for MLIA in the past, you want to use this section of the proposal to make your case that you are going to improve past performance. What measures are you going to take if you haven't been successful in completing reports on time and finishing work? Weather can affect things, for example. The ability to collect data can be influenced by weather. Obviously, currently the pandemic has affected us in terms of completing projects. So we're not necessarily saying that we have control over all the challenges that we face in completing projects on time. But maybe it's simply a matter of communication. If you're unable to finish something because of extenuating circumstances, part of addressing that is communicating with the MLIA staff to say, here's our problem. Don't go silent. Even something like that can help you improve your accountability improve how your accountability is perceived. So again, look back at any past mistakes, try to figure out how you can improve upon them. What is the progress in any current MLIA projects? So it's essentially saying, giving you the opportunity to say, hey, look, we're doing a good job with the money you've given us so far, and we'd like some more. Or we know we've made some mistakes in the past, but here's how we're going to remedy them. This is that opportunity to do that.
Yeah, so just a point of clarification too. In the application itself, you will actually would physically go in and say, do you currently have a grant? And you would select yes or no. And then it'll ask you if you've had grants for the past total of 5 years. And like Janet said, if you've had issues in the past, you as your organization, of course, this would be your time to say how you're going to rectify those. And be sure to go in and research whether or not your organization did have a grant recently, because sometimes that piece does get left out.
Thanks,
So
Sharon.
let me take it one step further. So Pend Oreille County elections and Pend Oreille County planning is still Pend Oreille County, and we would like for that to be answered on behalf of the entire county.
Okay, the scope of work is the 25% of your score. And this section, this is an upload, isn't it? Rather than a an upload of information.
That's correct.
One thing I'd like to say too, before talking about this, part of your readiness again is is review the application ahead of time. And don't wait to write these sections till you've got the application open on your desk and you're filling things in. You can review the application ahead of time and then compose your answers so that once you have the application open, you can just upload these. Preparing them in a Word document first will enable you to find errors and also make sure it's complete. Gives you some time to write and then let it rest and come back and read it again before you submit it. So the scope of work, the purpose of this is, and how it will be measured, is that you've demonstrated that you have prepared, that you've done the research, that you understand the need, and that the approach you're taking is directly related to that need. And then again, that you've done that readiness piece. The scope of work should also demonstrate that you are going to be able to complete this project within the 1-year time frame. So again, that's discrete tasks associated with some kind of timeline that really do have, those tasks do have, are being undertaken, have a large chance of success in being completed. The scope of work, and this is where, you know, if you have a consultant or a GIS specialist can help you, demonstrating the knowledge and use of existing data standards and best practices and data models. So in other words, that you understand the technical nature of the information that you're collecting and how it needs to be managed. And again, this timeline I spoke to, completing a project timeline of defined project tasks. And that can include everything from procuring your consultant to equipment purchases, and then how things are related to one another. So again, starting certain aspects of your project may depend on the successful procurement of some particular item. And then what I mentioned in some of the earlier slides is you have to concisely describe how the proposed activities that you're undertaking and the products you will produce, your deliverables, will accomplish the goals and objectives of, it says here, the grant category priority, but I would also say your own community objectives as well, your own needs. So you want to tie those goals and objectives that you've identified, why are you doing this, that purpose, to both the goals of the land use plan and to your own community needs. And again, this is worth 25%. So a very simple example would be the one that Danny spoke of. You know, in terms of hazard mitigation, you can talk about tier 2 priorities for business practice, business processes in the land plan, and you can talk about making your community a safer place according to your hazard mitigation plan. So again, you can tie those benefits to both your local interests, the interests of your partners, if you have any, as well as the bigger state picture. So some additional notes on the scope of work. Remember to focus on those goals, objectives, and tasks. And a little bit later, we're going to talk about how we think about strategic planning, the hierarchy of what are goals, objectives, and tasks, and how do they relate to one another. You're going to be presenting, again, a time-based chronology of activities, and it can, as I said, a visual timeline, but there's also some room in your narrative, which I'm going to look here. I think there's, trying to look at the scope here. I didn't write down how many characters, but I think there's quite a bit. Anyway, the identify funding associated with each project or task. In other words, there may not be enough money to fund your entire project. So one of the things that you want to make sure you do in budgeting is identify those pieces that can be funded, even if you don't get the entire amount. The other thing is it also helps you keep on track. If you have a $15,000 grant and the task number 1 is supposed to cost $5,000 and all of a sudden it's costing $7,500, how do you manage that? So you should be very aware of not just the total amount of the grant, but how the funding will be distributed among the various pieces. And then work to accomplish what is doable within the time frame and with respect to available resources. This goes back to kind of the constant theme today, which is don't take on more than you can reasonably accomplish, both with respect to funding and personnel and time, or not just both, all of those. And again, remember that more may not necessarily be better. So associated with that scope, but not separately scored, is a section that the electronic form, which is sponsored by Amplifund, it has a section that is called performance plan. It's what we typically in the consultant biz called deliverables. These are things that you're actually going to have when you're done. What will you produce as a result of this grant funding? And it can include data sets, code, maps, training materials, photos, videos, and there might be other things. And then you want to tie those deliverables, those products, to specific tasks. And here's where language and syntax get a little bit confusing. What we call tasks, actual activities, an Amplifund online application is going to call these goals. And but what we're really talking about is if you're trying to, for example, improve centerline information, and your product is a set of new data sets, the task would be to collect that data, and the result is going to be those data sets. Again, that task in Amplifund speak are going to be called goals. And then again, assure that this information aligns with the tasks identified in the scope of work. So, and again, if you'll bear with me, in a little bit, we're going to talk about the hierarchy of strategic planning, and these terms, how we're using these terms may become more clear. But essentially here, what are you going to produce, and how do those products relate to how you've outlined your project and associated activities? The next piece is the budget, and this accounts for 25% of the application point scoring. And again, this goes back to feasibility. Are you proposing to do something with a reasonable budget? Is the money adequate? And one of the things I've often told my students is don't ask for less, don't ask for more. Part of your credibility goes to understanding how much things are really going to cost. If you overstate the cost with the hopes of getting at least some of it, you're misrepresenting the information. As I said before, it's much better to look at it on a task basis and assigning costs based on elements of your project, understanding that there is a chance that not all the elements will be funded. But overstating the cost of a particular step does not benefit you, and it is not a good planning tool. Your budget then should be, it demonstrates that you can actually do what you've said you want to do with respect to the amount of resources available, that the budget justifies, in other words, that there's a narrative that goes with it, that explains the associated costs of each task, and that there is some ability to leverage outside funding. Projects that have other, there's not a specific matching requirement, but wherever MLIA dollars can go further because of other contributions, either in kind or cash, the better the outcome will be, both for the grant fund and for the applicant. So again, feasibility is the first bullet, justification for the amounts, and leveraging other resources. And some initial notes on budgeting. Again, you need to provide a narrative of how you derive the costs. So that can be in terms of quotes from suppliers, consultant, proposal funding or consultant rates or going rates, things like mileage, using the state mileage rates, previous project experiences to know how much things cost based on other project. Essentially, all of those things help you to demonstrate that the budget is appropriate to the task. Understanding how much things are going to cost goes again to your credibility and your management and organizational capacity for getting the project done. And then there are a series of budget spreadsheets or budget spreadsheet, and John's going to talk about that here in a moment. In grant funding, we talk about sources and uses of funds. Where is the money coming from and how is it going to be used is a really important concept, particularly if a part of your funding might be earmarked for only certain elements. So you want to make sure you have a good handle on what things cost and how the money is going to flow to make those payments. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to John Kilgar to talk a little bit more about this part of the application.
Great, thanks, Janet. Morning, everybody. Just going to try to share my screen here. All right. Everyone able to see this? It should be the State Library website. Great.
Yes.
Cool. I recognize a lot of names from the Amplifund training earlier this week, so I'm not going to go into the application in great detail, but just want to point out some of the highlights and maybe review a few of the more complicated sections. So you can access the Amplifund application from the State Library's MLIA Grant Information webpage. And the link to the Amplifund application is right here. Apply for an FY 2023 MLIA grant. And that will take you to this opportunity page, providing just some overview information about the grant program and the grant application. Couple things to point out here, and I think this ties into some of Janet's recommendations. If you'd like to review all of the contents and questions in the application before actually jumping in to complete it, you can download a PDF version here. I think, yes, there it is. And it'll download a zip file for you, and you can just go ahead and open that up. And the formatting is going to look a little different in this version, but all of the content is there explaining the point distributions, the character limits and things like that, and all of the instructions. Oops. Once you are ready to apply, you can just click on apply here. If you've started an application already, you'll see a link to it listed here. If you need to start a new application, just go ahead and click on Start New Application. And I do recommend, for anyone who didn't attend the training earlier in the week, I recommend viewing the Amplifund webinar that was presented on the technical aspects of completing the application. And we can make that available to everyone who's attending this meeting as well. Kind of an overview of the application components is available across the top here. You would start with project information, which is this page, and just some very basic information about your grant project. The bulk of the application is in these three components here: application forms, budget, and performance plan. And the application forms section relates to all of the major components that Janet was presenting earlier in the workshop. I won't go through each and every one of them, but just to kind of give everyone a sense, of what the system looks like. If you go into the project management component, you'll see it's a mix of text fields for entering information like the project manager's name and contact information, text fields like this. Character limits are noted at the bottom of each text field. And again, what what we would suggest is compiling your responses in a separate document, in a Word document, and then copying and pasting into the application once you have everything completed. You'll see that there are some radio buttons that you can choose from, yes, no options, things like that. Some of them have some conditional questions built into them. And then there are also places where you can upload certain types of files. So I think it's pretty straightforward. Should be pretty easy to complete, I think. But if anyone does run into questions, again, reach out to us at any time. Couple specific things to touch on. Janet was just discussing the scope of work and the budget sections, and we do have some, I think some important requirements to be aware of for those two pieces of the application. Those are not completed as forms in Amplifund. Those are separate documents that should be downloaded, completed separately, and then attached to your application. So for the scope of work and the written budget justification narrative, that would be attached here when the file is complete as a Word document, please. And to access the templates, you can click on this link here. That will download another zip file.
And I just uploaded them to the chat in this chat, John, so folks
Great.
can grab them there too.
Awesome, thank you. And I do happen to have them open already, so I'll just open them up here. So this is the scope of work and budget justification template. It includes instructions. It includes a formatted list that reflects the formatting we would like to see in the scope of work. And we do ask that everyone follow this format of goals, objectives, and specific tasks that will help complete those objectives and goals. And for each task, we would like everyone to please include a completion date, and that will constitute the timeline for the grant project. We have an example, short example here of what a completed scope of work might look like. And then we also have instructions for completing the budget narrative. If you scroll down to the bottom of the template, there's essentially a blank form here. And this is where we'd like you to enter that information, just pasting or typing the scope of work into this section here. And then the budget narrative here. And then once those are complete, the instructions can be deleted. The only thing that needs to be submitted to the application is everything in this section here. I do believe we have a limit of 4 pages for the written scope of work and 2 pages for the budget narrative. Does anyone have any questions about those 2 pieces at this point? Or Aaron, would you like to add anything about those 2 pieces?
Yeah, for the budget narrative, one of the slides that Janet had showed right before John took over screen share was basically outlining how you came to your costs that have been outlined in the budget, whether that's you have received quotes or you've done your research, you've worked with consultants. We don't need that documentation. We don't want that documentation. So you do not have to submit that with your budget narrative. I would suggest that you hold on to that, because if we do have questions post award of how you got to that amount, we'll probably reach out to you. But we don't need additional proof that how you came up with those numbers. It just needs to be outlined in the narrative.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so that once that is complete, that would be uploaded here. The other template that's contained in that zip file is for completing a detailed budget table. And that's what this template looks like. Okay, well, is everyone able to see this? Is this large enough? Okay, great. So we do have a couple things here. The front page is instructions and steps to follow for completing this. The next page is the budget form itself. And then the last page, please don't make any changes here. It will throw off some of the formatting that's in the rest of the template. But basically what we would like applicants to do here is for each task, create a line item in this budget table and assign it to a budget category. And those categories, well, I'm sorry, this isn't having a little trouble with this. Let's see.
Click enable editing. That should help you.
Yeah, it's odd. I'm doing that and getting a pop-up saying that.
Do a file save as somewhere else on your desktop.
Okay,
probably.
good
Yeah.
idea.
You might be working in the zip file or file save. Yeah. There. Are you working in the zip?
I am, yeah.
Okay, that's why.
Let's see, how can I fix this?
Don't you have a save as rather than just
No,
say?
because he's working in the zip. If you go to the file,
I could drag it out of the zip
yeah,
onto my
try that.
desktop. Sorry, everyone.
This is a real
Thanks.
demo, folks.
Yep.
This might happen to you, so this is a great demonstration.
Now, where did that go?
I've got a quick question about Amplifund.
Yes.
I can try to answer that while John gets that opened.
Is this the first year you guys have used Amplifund for this application?
Nope, second. We
This
were
is the
the
second.
first agency to, I think, to have an application or to jump. I can't remember. The state was using a tool called Web Grants, and they're migrating away from that and no longer met the state's needs. And and so we were, because we had only had one application process in Web Grants, so we kind of jumped in at an opportune time when everyone was changing. Of course, I say that sarcastically. And so that year we had to kind of back enter all the Amplifund. So it could be certain grantees' third year with it, third grant within Amplifund, if they are submitting one this go around.
The reason I'm asking is I did a grant through for the Board of Crime Control for a job I had last year, and they used Amplifund, and it was MBCC's first year using it, and they used our program to kind of fix some bugs in the application process. So it was a huge learning curve, and there was a lot of it seemed like a lot of redundancy in Amplifund as far as what they considered goals or tasks, and having to copy information over into 2 or 3 different places. So I was just kind of hoping that wasn't the case here.
Well, I think we've tried to do our best, John and I, to make it easier on grant recipients. And so that's why this year we're having everyone fill out the scope in a document form and just upload that instead of, and then eventually we will put that back into the system.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Some of these requirements are based on lessons learned from the last year. So this, I think, finally got it working. Thanks, everybody. So just kind of starting from scratch, what we'd like to see in this detailed budget template is a line item for each specific task in your scope of work. And you can see some examples here. And then for each task, assigning a budget category. And all of those categories are available in this drop-down menu: personnel, travel, equipment, supplies, contractual, or other. And then for each expense, we'd like you to indicate the funding source. And this menu looks a little odd right now, but if this front page is completed, let's say the applicant is City of Helena and the partner is Lewis and Clark County. That will then populate these selections here. And so you can choose whatever the correct funding source is: MLIA grant funds, City of Helena cash, City of Helena in-kind, Lewis and Clark County cash, Lewis and Clark County in-kind, and so on and so forth. And then if it is for something like personnel or contractor hours, we'd like an estimate of the hours, a rate for any of that work, whether it's an hourly rate or maybe a per unit rate, whatever the case may be, and then the total cost for that line item. Couple kind of quick notes. If you have a task like this example here, task 3.2.1, that's kind of applies to two different budget categories, or maybe comes from two different funding sources, please just create two or more line items to account for all of that. Okay, does anyone have any questions about this form here? Okay. So once that's complete, we'd like that to be uploaded as well. Please, as an Excel version, so that we can edit it if needed, but also as a PDF version. We will include that in the application packet submitted and provided to the review committee. We do have an option here to add some additional information for PLSS grants. There's a PLSS proposed collection form that can be downloaded here, completed and attached. And Aaron, would you like to add anything about these PLSS requirements?
I think that the well, do you want to click on the map since you're
Sure.
in demo?
Yep.
Perfect, thank you. So this was the map I had mentioned earlier with the priority collection areas identified. And so you can see those areas, and part of the application asks if your proposed collection falls within or within this area, and then if it does, you don't have to answer additional questions. But if it does not, do you want to go back to that, John? And
yep.
Show that real quick. Thank you. So if you click no, I think it's no. If it falls outside of the priority areas, we would like you to provide a written justification, including maps that describe the need for the proposed collection, and do not exceed 1 page for the written justification. So if you have a couple maps along with that written justification, we would like just a simple explanation of why you're collecting outside of that area. And I wouldn't hesitate to get in touch with folks over here at the state. Like I said, you can contact myself. I could put you in contact with the correct people, or Jeff Hedstrom and Michael Fashaway are here on the call, and they can answer some of those additional questions.
Thanks, Aaron.
I guess one more thing is, this is proposed collection. Part of the process is we go through and we do additional analysis. First of all, to make sure that the information has not already been collected, whether it was done by another state agency, perhaps tribes, or local government, depending on who's filling out the grant. We try to gather as much collection control when we can. And so when a project is done over at MDT, we work with them to collect any new control that they might have. So that's the one important thing, is to reduce duplication of efforts, because it's very costly for the state and local government to pay for something that's already been completed. So we ask for the proposed control, and I think the other thing is to try to, in this case, perhaps propose more control, because there are times when certain points cannot be collected because of perhaps physical features of the landscape, or we might already have it. So I would say put in, work with the analysts here, and to make sure we get that as honed in as possible before the grant process, before submittal, or that's one of the things we'll work on between award and signing the contract.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. Couple quick things here. There's space for additional documents if they're helpful, but this is not required. And then several acknowledgements to agree to. And then this last piece serves kind of like a digital signature, where someone authorized to approve the grant application can enter their name and date, and that would be done prior to submission. Couple other quick things, and I want to not take up too much time here, but there is another budget table to be filled out in AmpliFund, but we see this as essentially a budget summary, and this is not where we require specific line items for all project tasks or anything like that. We would just like an overview of the budget. So referring back to the detailed budget table, for example, please calculate all personnel costs, and the other categories as well. And then for any category, we would just like to see the total costs for that category. Okay, so personnel may be let's say there's $5,000 of personnel costs, and the applicant would like to contribute that as an in-kind contribution. This piece is a bit counterintuitive, but where it says non-grant funded, you would select yes if it's a match contribution. Let's say it's in-kind match, $5,000. Could write a brief explanation here. Let's say it's staff time. And then that will create a line item, but this is really the only line item required. We don't need anything more specific than that. One exception, if there's partner funding in a certain category, we would like to see a separate line item to distinguish the partner funding from the primary applicant funding. So let's say in equipment, the applicant is applying for $5,000 of MLIA funds for equipment. You could create a line item saying equipment MLIA contribution, $5,000. It is grant funded, so you would say no to non-grant funded. And that would be created there. And let's say that a funding partner, was also going to contribute $5,000 for equipment. And I'm just using generic terms here. In an actual application, you could include, say, the name of the county or town or city that is the funding partner. But let's say they're contributing $5,000. In this case, it is non-grant funded for match. And we'll say it's $5,000 cash and create it. And so this this would be the only situation where we would want to see multiple line items in a budget category is when there are multiple funding partners or funding sources involved in a certain budget category. And in our instruction packet, we do have some detailed instructions for completing this table, as well as some screenshots. Anyone have any questions here? Okay, and then just very briefly, the last piece is the deliverables section, what is termed an Amplifund the performance plan. And it's fairly straightforward. We have instructions here for every project deliverable. You would want to click on this button here, the plus add goal. That will bring up some fields for you to complete. There are several different types of goals that can be used. Numeric, for example, could be surveying a certain number of corners or something like that. Milestone is probably the most applicable to most situations. Milestone allows you to define a specific goal or deliverable. Let's call it just surveying corners for the time being. You would put a description here and then enter a due date at some point during the grant period and create it. One thing I missed, which we would like to see, is an explanation of which task in the scope of work each deliverable is tied to. So what you could do is just type a description. And then explain which task or tasks in the scope of work are resulting in this deliverable. And then once everything's complete, you can go to the submission page. You'll get some warnings if things are incomplete. There's really no way to submit the application if it's incomplete. But once everything's done, you would come here and simply click on submit. So that's the basics of the application. Happy to take questions about anything, or Janet, maybe if I know you have a lot more to cover, so we may just want to move on, and if there's time at the end for questions about Amplifund, we could come back to it then.
That sounds good. I'll try to move through the last part of this so that everyone can, we have time to get back to questions. Thank you. Can everyone see back to my screen again? So again, I know some of you are experienced grant writers, and some of you have a little less experience, but I hope this will be beneficial to everyone. So one of the things although it's a bit negative, I like to start with are reasons that proposals fail. And I know all of you are about solutions, but you want to be tying those solutions to particular needs, identified needs. So if the proposal isn't, is a solution in search of a problem rather than as a answer to it, that can mean a failure. If you're unable to demonstrate clearly the benefit to the public, again, information for its own sake is all well and good on a theoretical basis, but you really want to try to carefully articulate or do correctly articulate the benefits. That readiness, that planning ahead is so critical. And I know we're on a fairly tight time frame on these grants, but again, remember that taking that little extra bit of time to prepare yourself will really help you overcome this this challenge that often results in failure. And remember, you have multiple stakeholders here, multiple clients. You are helping further the state of Montana's land information priorities, its goals. So it's not just your needs that you're addressing, you're also addressing the needs of the people of Montana, and that's really important to remember. The preparer does not follow directions. And again, in this case, the application will help safeguard against that because of the electronic nature, but the content needs to follow the directions as well. So don't disqualify yourself simply by failing to provide information. And then be good writers, be good team writers. Work with your team if you have one, or others to help you edit. But if you cannot convey your ideas clearly, that often is a reason for not being successful in your effort. Conversely, successful proposals meet the client's needs. In this case, your client is the Montana Land Information Act and the council. Essentially, you're successfully addressing the goals or the priorities of the land plan. There's also a bit of marketing here, being able to sell your idea well, imparting a sense of critical nature, the significance, the urgency of your project, and again, that you have in fact the ability to get it done. In some cases, having good creative and analytical skills are important, but certainly in your types of grants, think about the obstacles that you may encounter and how are you going to address those obstacles? In other words, a creative approach may mean that you have taken into account weather issues, distance issues, and how you might anticipate and then plan for those issues. And then understanding the material, demonstrating your expertise and writing your proposal with a good eye towards cohesiveness, coherency in your writing. So this is what I was talking about earlier in terms of hierarchy. We use a lot of these words interchangeably, but I'd like to, this list is based on some work that the Cooperative Extension Service did years ago in terms of how we think about strategic planning for any organization, for any entity. And think about it as a hierarchy of approach. And I think if you think about the way you present tasks, goals, and objectives this way, I think it will really help in your thinking. We talked about understanding the need. What is the problem? What is the need that you're addressing? And then I have the word mission because often these are organizational issues, but in this case, you can also think of mission as your purpose. And then we think about goals, objectives, and actions. And if you'll all bear with me, I sometimes use a sports analogy, which is really ironic since I know very little about sports. But if you think about a football game, your goals are, of course, to make goals, to make touchdowns. That's your goals. Your objectives are the pieces to get there, the yardage, the benchmarks, as John mentioned earlier, that help you achieve those touchdowns. And ultimately, the actions are the strategies, the plays that enable you to meet those objectives in support of those goals. And the actions are the tasks, the specific tasks that enable you to meet those benchmarks. So thinking about those and using that frame of mind helps you think about it, even though in some cases, as you saw, Amplifund uses different terminology. But if you yourself look at the goal, look at the touchdown that you ultimately want to accomplish to serve your mission and purpose to address your need, what do you need to get done by when? And how are you going to do it are your actions. And then those guidelines and standards, what are the, the protocols, the normal things that you need to do to make sure that you meet the standards that are set forth in good professional practice, as well as the guidelines and standards that you operate with respect to the grant guidelines, to your other funders and partners, and your own entities. So again, the structure within which we operate. And sometimes those guidelines and standards have certain criteria, like for example, in housing grants or in equal opportunity or employment grants, very often those guidelines and standards have to do with ethical practices and civil rights. So there's various kinds of guidelines and standards that you operate within. So in building your project, going back to the beginning, tying this back to what we said earlier on readiness, remember again to look at your other community goals and objectives with respect to your overall purpose, and again, those types of plans, and to the Montana Land Information Plan Act. And then recognize, once you have that, you have a need and you're tying it to these other community visioning or agency visioning documents, it's also important to look at alternative approaches. It may be that are more than one approaches that you might, more than one approach that might work, and you want to evaluate them. This concept is easier to understand, again, if you're looking at a tangible asset, like if you want to buy a fire truck for your community, do you buy used, do you buy new? Those kinds of issues come up and you have different alternative approaches. And it may be in a project for the Montana Land Information Act that you can identify alternative approaches. Do you want to do a little bit of a lot of things or a lot of one thing, or what is the, how is it best? Is it best to spend money doing one activity versus another? Thinking about that. And so you have to look at not just the cost of doing it, but what are the long-term costs of particularly choosing one method over another? Will you have to have expertise on staff long-term? What is the staffing requirements for that implementation and maintenance based on which alternative you select? Are there any impacts associated with choosing one alternative over another? How easy is it to maintain? What system? And again, these may not be relevant to your project, but what I'm asking here is that you consider that there may be more than one way to approach your project, and what are the ramifications, the pros and cons of each one. And then projects that can have partners brought in, choosing a project alternative that enables the use of partners might be rated higher than other approaches. So evaluating alternatives is important. And again, some of this is repetitive, so I'll just touch on it. Again, looking at what your project needs to be successful. And then look at your overall budget, your overall organization. How does this project relate to other things you're doing, other funding streams? Who's responsible for managing those fiscal affairs? And then part of that budget, remember, is that long-term sustainability. Is your county or city or agency going to be able to commit funds annually to maintain this project once the grant funding is over? So remember that, you might have a multiple year project, but ultimately you have to answer the question is, how will this be maintained over time? And I can't, is it going to be a mill levy? Is it going to be a special fee that goes on property taxes? Is it going to be other long-term grant funding? It's maybe a partnership with another agency. But how are you going to fund this these activities going forward? Part of the budgeting is also looking at the funding strategy. How are you going to, what can you as an applicant offer in either in-kind or cash? What might your partners be offering? versus what you're seeking from the grant. And here's again a point that we touched on earlier, but I want to say it again. Can this project be phased? In other words, can you, if you break it into pieces, can you get some phases done and still have accomplished something and then move on to the next phase? But again, you have to apply. You can't apply for a multi-grant program all at once, multi-year program all at once. While you have a good chance of continuing funding, particularly if you achieve what you set out to achieve in your first year. But there are no guarantees. So you again, want to make sure that if you only get funding for phase one, that you still have something valuable. But again, multi-year projects are a possibility, but you want to maybe, you should focus on getting what you said you're going to get done in the first phase in order to then have a good chance of getting subsequent grants. There's no limit on the number of years that you can have a 5-year project or a 10-year project. Maybe you'll get funded 8 out of 10 of those years, but again, thinking about things in phases might increase the feasibility of your project and its chance for funding. And then again, that long-term funding sustainability should be a key part of that funding strategy. And again, it's part of what is being evaluated in your grant. So you can't put off that kind of thinking till later. I mean, it's obviously we can never predict with 100% certainty that will be funded after the grant, but that should be foremost in your mind in terms of making a case for how you might approach sustainability. Again, you only have a few weeks to get this done, but remember, organizing your effort to make sure it's done. But even as you go forward in developing your scope of work, don't promise more than you can reasonably accomplish. That creates an uncertainty on your funders' part. Well, do we really want to fund these folks again if they can't get their work done? So we really want to make sure that we've planned a reasonable timeline and identify those tasks to meet those objectives, anticipate needs. Again, what are the potential delays in a project? What are the, what's going to happen if, for example, you have a power failure or there's a supply chain issue and your equipment that you've ordered and paid for isn't going to come for 2 more months? How are you going to accommodate for that? And then I also recommend, particularly because you have to provide periodic reports, is keep a journal. And that can be a pad of paper on your desk that just notes, what did you do today on your grant? Whom did you meet with? How much data entry was accomplished this week? Just keep notes so that when you have to make your reports to the state library folks, you have that all written down. And I have found that to be the most helpful for grant reporting requirements, is keeping that journal. And also, as you're writing your grant, keeping a journal, making sure that you have notes, potential partners, notes about, again, who you've met with, what were the concerns that maybe the forest or the university system is going to help you, or the Department of State Lands is going to help you, or that's, I guess, part of natural resources now. But you want to say, I talked to Joe at MSU Billings, and he said that the university would provide a lab space and 20 hours of personnel time. Write that down so that it's handy for you when you have to submit your application. And then a few notes on writing for clarity. So make your organization of your writing clear. If, in your Word documents, make sure your paragraphs are clear. If you need headings and subheadings, make sure those headings are clearly delineated. Follow a pattern so that that your readers can sort of see where you're going. Take that time to organize your writing. Secondly, watch your sentences and your paragraphs. No, don't have paragraphs that are one sentence long. Strive for about an average sentence length of about 2 lines or 25 words on average, much more readable. Make your writing active and personal. Try to use active nouns, active verbs. Instead of the data will be completed, you'll say our GIS consultant will complete this data. That really helps you connect to your reader. And then avoid vague adjectives. Take out words like huge and awesome and love, and just report the information. The more specificity you can provide to your grant reviewers, the more likely that you will be taken seriously. So again, specific numbers, types of equipment, avoid vague or anything that might have some ambiguity. Really work hard to make your writing accessible. Down to earth language, write to express, not to impress. We're not interested in how smart you think you are, but rather how well you understand the problem and convey your solutions to solving them. So I have some rules. Avoiding those platitudes, huge, awesome, adorable, anything like that should be not in your writing. Rules for numbers. If you are using, I have 3 approaches. Spell it out. Anything from 1 to 9 should be spelled out. Numbers above that should be the whole numerals, although there are exceptions, addresses, software versions, those kinds of things that use the numerals. And then again, just clear words. Affect is the action, effect is the result. Around and about, if you're using approximate, around sometimes is not quite the right word. Number and amount, anything you can count. We use the word numbers, or we don't say amount if we can count them. Eliminate the do and the run from your vocabulary. Rather, we're going to do data collection. We're going to conduct data collection. Again, specificity, so important. Rigid writing of gobbledygook is really kind of a difficult thing to do in the GIS world. We're so full of jargon and acronyms, but still try to make your writing as clear as possible. If you're using an acronym, consider whether, it's too obscure and you might want to spell out the word as well. But I realize that in this field, we use acronyms so easily that it may not be a concern here. Resist creating long sentences with semicolons. Again, shorter sentences are easier to read, and you definitely want your reviewers to be able to understand what you have to say. Embrace parallel construction. If you have a list, of things, make sure they're all presented in the same way. So in other words, if we're using action verbs, conduct research, collect data, review data sets, provide narratives, use action verbs. Make sure that you're really punching your information so that when you're presenting anything in a series, you present them using the same constructs. And also write for the man or woman from Mars. In my technical writing classes, I have my students write directions for a person from Mars and how to drive a car. And one of the things we have to remember is that the people reviewing your applications are going to be very bright. They're going to be very knowledgeable in GIS, but they may not know your community or your agency. And so you want to help describe things, give reference points in your writing to help people find some, to relate to what you're saying, that they can picture in their minds what you're talking about. Don't assume knowledge that your reader might have knowledge that reader might not have. So again, remember that you are kind of a role as a teacher. You're helping provide context, and you can do that with very few words. You know, our community is in the located in the northwest corner in the state, you know, approximately 50 miles from Kalispell. Helping people see where you are can be very helpful. And there's a bit of an irony in all of this. Even though you're dealing with maps, many of you are geographers, GIS specialists, but remember to help people see where you are. As I just said, just remembering that while the people at the state library do know far more geography about the state of Montana than your average Montanan, you still want to help be clear about where you are, not just on your map, but in your organization. Are you a city planner? Are you a county supervisor or county commissioner member? Are you an IT person for your entity? So remember, you know, who you are, where you are, very important. Another one of my issues is pronouns. Remember, when you use words like they and them and their, make sure that you know what the antecedent is. You know, who is they? So if Stillwater County is making a presentation, they is not the county. You know, the county is, or we are, using words that are much more clear. And then again, brevity is a virtue. Conciseness is important. It'll be very easy to write 10,000 or 3,000 characters if you provide the information that's being requested. Make each word work for you. So coming back to writing accessible language, remember to consider your audience, and then you are going to have several audiences. You'll have your review committee, the Montana Land Information Advisory Council, and the State Library Board. So you're having people with a variety of different levels of expertise with relationship to GIS. So while it is a very technical field and you're going to use technical language, as much as possible, try to make your writing accessible. Remember, how will the audience use your document? They're going to use your narrative against those evaluation criteria. So you want to help your readers see how you are meeting those criteria and the relationship that your writing has, your answers have to the Land Information Plan and the Montana Land Information Act. And remember that logicalness, flowing, making sure you organize your information in a parallel way so that, again, it's easy for the reader to see how you're organizing the information. Again, that task analysis, what tasks are you undertaking to meet your objectives in a logical way? Remember to also put yourself in the place of the reviewer. What question, if you were reading this, what question would those reviewers likely ask? As much as possible, ask a colleague, someone else in your department or in your agency or in a local government to read what you've written. What questions do you raise? Having someone else's eyes really can make a difference in how well your writing is received. It really can help. Someone will not only catch errors that you might have made, but also any kind of logical conflicts that don't appear, aren't readily understood, or information that you may have left out. Again, you want to express. That's your point, is you want to achieve something. Your goal is having that grant proposal be well received and funded. So if you want to make sure that your ideas are expressed clearly. Okay, and always identify the sources of any facts, ideas, quotations, and paraphrases. So if you're quoting, if you do find yourself needing to quote directly from a growth policy, make sure you identify the source. You don't necessarily have to use APA or whatever citation formats, but you should source. The 2015 Gallatin County growth policy states. Make sure that you tie those kinds of quotes or paraphrases to a source document. If you're repurposing information, this goes to one of the questions asked earlier about cutting and pasting information in-house, may not require citation, but do be careful and make sure if you're repurposing information that it fits, that you're not just blindly adding things that disrupt the flow of your document or that are actually abrupt to the reader. Where is this coming from? This isn't in the same voice, or this seems to be coming from something else. So be careful when you cut and paste. But anything that is submitted from any outside entity, including the grant program, should be cited. So anything that's been published or previously submitted to the MLIA Grant Program should be cited. And Aaron might want to add to this, but I know we've talked about this in the past. There's an ethical issue here. If you're including material that's not your own or has been previously published, it should be noted. And then you want to check underlying sources. So if you're taking something from a growth policy that was in turn based on the US Census, for example, make sure that you check those underlying sources as well. Aaron, did you want to add anything to this?
No, I think you
Okay.
you did a good job. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now coming back, so we can answer questions here in just a few minutes. I'd like to the last few slides are addressing the application process. The grant materials were released a couple of weeks ago on the 15th. All the applications are due on the 15th of February. In the past, there was opportunities to resubmit on certain questions and so forth. That's not the case any longer. Whatever we get on February 15th is it. May 15th, the Library Commission will meet and based on recommendations from the Grant Review Committee and the Montana Land Information Act Council, the commission will finalize the funding priorities based on available dollars. And remember, the applications are not just denied, they're actually they're ranked. Danny, you had a question?
Yeah, I have the land plan pulled up on my other screen, and it shows for key dates on page 7. It says March 5th is when the grant applications are due.
Oh,
Was that this current land information plan?
Yeah. On
That
page
is-
7, there's like a table with dates and tasks.
Okay, I think that is an error that had not gotten caught. Yeah, it is February 15th. Thank you for
Okay.
catching that. We'll make sure we get that updated.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
yes, thank you.
And,
Danny.
And just kind of a point of order here, for this third bullet, basically in line with our, it aligns with our rules. Let me pull up the right page. Basically that is our deadline. That's not the actual meeting date. Our deadline is that the notification of award will be no later than May 15th. And as for the MSL commission meetings, I'd have to look it up, but I'm pretty sure that the commission meets the week after our after the council meets on April 5th to prioritize those funds. So it goes to the council prioritizes the funding, and then it goes to the commission for approval. And I can look up the commission date.
All right, so I would say
That
commission
table have it.
approval, final.
This April 6th, March 5th, grant applications due April 6th, council meeting, May 12th, council meeting. That whole table might need to be updated.
Okay, I just put commission releases. Is that good? Is that more accurate?
They just have to be prioritized by that date. That's when
Oh,
we will
okay.
notice awards.
Okay, commission funding priorities finalized. Okay, so I took out the word meeting. Okay. So again, preparing for electronic submittal, prepare sections in advance. As I said, use your word processor to check character count, that you don't exceed the limit or fail to provide enough information. And then here's again, I can't tell you how important. It's allowing time for team members, project managers, and others to review. Just asking people, maybe offering to buy them dinner or something, but please, I think it's really important to get other people to look. And if it's at all possible, to try to let the document rest before final editing. Read sections aloud if you can. One of the things that I've always felt is that if you read something right after you write it, your eyes and your brain will gang up together and you'll only see what you intended to write. And if you read it aloud, your mouth and your ears can help you find errors that your brain and your eyes are not letting you see. Check application completements. Again, proofread every section. I can't overstate how important that is. Do not rely on spell check, because Bill Gates will spell words that you don't intend him to spell. So be careful on that. Don't rely on that alone to correct your document. Reread all the instructions, allow the time for information entry, and what kind of receipt, John and Aaron, will submitters receive if the application is submitted correctly? Will they get a receipt by email?
Great question. I'm going to have to refer to John.
I believe they will get an email receipt, but
Okay.
I can confirm that and just send that out to the group once we're done.
Okay.
Once I have an answer.
And I don't pester them, but if some time has gone by where you feel like you're not sure, it's always good to send Aaron or John or whomever a quick email saying, just wanted to make sure that, even if you take a screenshot when it says successfully submitted something, that's my own obsessive nature, but it's always good to make sure you have some kind of confirmation of receipt. If your project is ranked lower, if you fail to get funded, it's really good to go through debriefing with your funders, with MLIA in this case. If there's nothing to prevent you from making the same mistakes in the future, and then try to incorporate suggestions and concerns in future proposals. Again, things like poor presentation, failure to address the criteria, sometimes lack of innovation. That isn't always a problem, but sometimes it can be. Another element here is what Aaron mentioned about, making sure you're not being duplicative of some other work. Failure to address the funders' issues and concerns, for example, taking on too much. Is your timeline unrealistic? And if you haven't demonstrated good sustainability. So all of those things can contribute to a project failure. And then remember that prior negative experience. That grant accountability section enables you to address those issues so that you say you recognize you didn't meet your goals in the previous project, or we know these kinds of projects are difficult. try to mitigate that prior negative experience through a commitment to do better. And that's all I have. So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions. And if Aaron or John or any of the other staff here would like to add anything, this is a good opportunity to do that. I'm going to stop sharing, and here we go. Questions? I couldn't possibly have answered every question. Aaron, anything we think we should be covering, or John, that we haven't mentioned?
I guess just I would suggest that you read the land information plan, read the grant packets fully, take the Amplifund training, or review, I guess, watch the Amplifund training prior to filling it out, and then contact us with your questions. Don't wait to the last minute, because our schedules are busy, and if you need to speak with an analyst or one of the theme leads, you might not get to them in time. So try to get those questions answered as quickly as possible.
So that's a good question, Aaron, on the team leads, or on the, also the, do you still call them stewards, the MS, the folks that if you're doing a planning grant or preparing a planning grant proposal, how can they contact those leads? How would you, do you have any suggestions? Do they go through you?
That's a great question, and I have a slide for that. So let me pull up my presentation really quick. So basically, here are the folks. These are the theme leads for the Montana Spatial Data Infrastructure framework layers that are stewarded by the Montana State Library. And the web page for that can be found off of the grants pages itself on the right-hand side under GIS. If you click on Montana Spatial Data Infrastructure, you can navigate to each one of these pages to further research standards or the status of certain data layers, to download the information. And then when you click on a layer such as administrative boundaries, you get the theme lead information. So it's Megan Burns. And you probably work with her currently, and it has her email address and phone number. But again, here are the folks that are responsible for those layers. And then, so I would suggest that you reach out to them when you have questions. You can always CC myself, but the theme leads are going to let me know if someone does have a question about grants themselves, because usually it ends up being about some sort of administrative aspect of the program. And then basically, we're here to help you succeed. We want to see your success because, like Janet had said earlier, it furthers the mission of the State Library for producing standardized, sustainable data layers. And you can contact myself and or John Kilgour. We highly recommend you email the MLIA grants at mt.gov, because there'll be multiple people watching that email address. We both kind of monitor that inbox, and that's the best way, I think, right now. If you have an email, to email the both of us. We get a lot of communication this time of year, and so if it's specific to the grant program, please email that generic email. And then just want to say good luck